Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Dr. Michael Crow.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Pauline, and welcome to everyone. Today will only be 110 or so. For those of you that are wearing ties, we generally give up at 105. At 110, we look at other people and say, really? At 115, it's better just to stay in bed. And so, well, it's really exciting to have an opportunity to be here and speak with our elected and appointed Latino leaders from around the country. Just a quick tidbit about Arizona State University. We decided about 16 years ago that the trajectory of public universities in the United States was not on track to actually be of the greatest service that we might be to the United States. We began a systematic reformation of our institution at all levels. We're now an institution which, we have what we call a derived charter. Our charter says that we will not measure our success based on who we exclude, but who we include and how they succeed. Our charter says that we will do research that benefits the public, and that means everyone, not just companies, not just entrepreneurs, but benefits everyone. And the last thing that we say in our charter is that we will actually take responsibility for the outcome of our society. If our economy is not performing in the way that it should perform, if kids are not graduating from school, if new immigrant kids are not getting mainlined into a successful life for themselves and for their families, then we have failed. So we're taking responsibility for outcomes, social outcomes, cultural outcomes, economic outcomes, health and well-being outcomes. And so our institution, once we restructured who we are and how we work and what we do, everything changed. Everything changed. In 1985, less than 2% of the kids attending Arizona State University came from Pell-eligible families. In 1985, we only had 200 Latinos in our freshman class. We now have thousands of Latinos in our freshman class. Thousands. Point being, once you change the purpose and the design of the institution, and the emphasis of this panel today is on design and purpose. Once you change design and purpose, you're going to get different outcomes. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to bear with me a little bit. I apologize for this. Most of you can enjoy this fantastic lunch we had a little while ago. It was really good. Some people at my table even had 2 salads. And so I want to get the nature of the challenge that we have in terms of taking the United States to the highest level of achievement that our democracy and our economy can achieve. And that is, how do we rethink how to move forward from the perspective of educational attainment? So I'm going to fly through a bunch of data. I just want you to have the data in the back of your head. I'm not going to give you a lecture. It's not about the data. It's about what the data means. It's about the scale of the problem. Then we're going to bring up the panel, big city mayor, big foundation boss, former Secretary of Education. We're going to then spend some time talking about how could we design to do things differently. So one thing that we've done at ASU is we've worked really hard to make certain that we're not thinking only about kids, we're thinking about all generations. Maria here in the center is standing with her 2 daughters as she graduated from ASU in 2018, because if you can't bring the entire family along, you can't make anything happen. So when we talk about educational success, when we talk about American success, when we talk about Latino community contribution to American success, it's about the entire family, not just the kids. So it turns out, you heard something about this the other day. Somebody must remember that someone said that something represents an existential threat to the United States, and the answer was that somehow immigration represents an existential threat to the United States. That's absurd, beyond absurd. We are a country of immigrants, period. End of conversation. So the only existential threat to the United States is whether or not we can take our entire population to the highest levels of educational attainment that allows us to drive the economy and our communities forward in really significant ways. So here's something that we've got. Bachelor's degree attainment for adult population between 1975 and 2017. So we got a gap we have to close. And the reason I talk about bachelor's degree education, bachelor's degrees, it's not because of the bachelor's degree. It's because we need to get a certain percentage of our population to a certain level of educational attainment that allows them to become completely adaptive to any kind of economic change or technological change that comes forward so that the economy can continue to grow and expand and evolve through anything. And it turns out that bachelor degree education is one way to catalyze that. It's a way to make that happen in new ways. So you can see the gap. You can see the nature, the difference between native-born folks of Hispanic origin and foreign-born folks of Hispanic origin. The point here is 100 million people by 2060 of Hispanic origin. That's larger than any country in Europe. That's almost the size of Mexico. That's larger than Germany, larger than France, larger than Spain. This is an unbelievable economic opportunity, an unbelievable mechanism for the building of energy and the attainment of outcomes for the United States is the population that will soon measure 100 million people. This is educational attainment. What this tells you is that the blue colors, the blue shades, this is Hispanic educational attainment by age group. The bluer the color going forward into the future, the less prepared the individual for massive transformational changes derivative of economic and technological change. This chart should get everyone's attention. Just put that. The bluer the color, the less prepared for those kinds of changes in the economy that lies ahead. We're not designing the economy at the speed of change that it's going through. We're not designing the economy at the rates of change that it's going through. What we do know is that if you have a high school diploma or less, there's 20% fewer jobs in the present economy than there were in 2007. Those jobs don't even exist. And so this is a question about how to prepare folks for the future. This is, again, looking at it in another direction. The bluer the color, the less prepared for the economy of the future. So we need to drive orange and gray and green. I'm just trying to give you the scale of the issue here. So bachelor degrees needed to bring Hispanic population to the average educational attainment, that is to the national average. If we were looking at this, what would it take? These are numbers within each age group. 800,000 people, 900,000 people, 900,000 more people. This is the scale from a population perspective of the exciting challenge and opportunity that we have to drive up Hispanic educational attainment, and to do this in a way in which we can affect the outcome of the economy of the United States. That little calculation on the left is really important. It's a weird kind of calculation. I apologize for this, but I just calculated what would it be to the economy if we made educational attainment differences at this scale. And if we added it all up, it's worth about 2 points on the national economic competitiveness growth rate. So right now we have an economy that's operating at about 2.5% economic growth, 2.6% economic growth. In Arizona, 3.2% economic growth. If we could drive up educational attainment in these communities to these levels, which means just to the national average, it's more than 1.5 points in the national rate of economic growth, just as a function of the new economy that's derivative. So here, take a look at this. This is mean annual earnings over a 40-year time frame. If you have a bachelor's degree at the top, Hispanics with bachelor's degrees, all adults in the entire economy, Hispanic adults in the entire economy. The fact that these lines are not on top of each other is indicative of every kind of problem that one can imagine, but we also know that of the 1,000 variables that contribute to these differences, the single most important variable is educational attainment in terms of changing the trajectory of these lines. This is really an important slide. Again, this is just giving you some background here. Bachelor's degree attainment for adults. This is if everything stays the same. You can see that the gap actually furthers, even grows wider from 51% to 30%. This is of the present rate of change, present rate, all the things that we're doing, every ounce of energy that we have, every innovation that we have, everything that we're doing will produce this result. This is the gap closing mechanism. This is what's necessary to close the gap. That's a very steep line over the next 30 years. So if we want, I can't convince many people of this yet because most of them are either too ignorant or too bigoted to sort of get this and grasp it fully. And that is that it turns out that the United States is under-realizing its full economic competitiveness opportunity because it has very uneven outcomes in the educational attainment levels of its children. If we can equalize those educational attainment levels, if we can alter and change the opportunity that everyone has to be able to move their life forward after higher and higher levels of educational attainment, then you get a different kind of outcome. So here's what closing the bachelor's degree attainment gap by 2050 means. Again, I apologize for the academic stuff, but let me put this into perspective. Right now, adult Latino degree attainment must increase annually from its present 0.41% to 1.07%. That's not really important. Look at the numbers. 24,000 to 64,000, so 64,000. So where we are now is 24,700. We have to increase that to 64,300 every year. 64,000 more, 64,000 more, 64,000 more, above whatever the previous year was. There are no mechanisms in place to achieve that goal right now at the scale necessary to achieve it. Just the opposite. Just the opposite. Universities are not redesigning themselves. Community colleges are having ups and downs. We haven't figured out how to do things at scale. I was speaking to Jimenez he's going to come up on the panel a little bit before we got together about how we more than doubled the size of our engineering school and increased the number of minority students by a factor of 5 and the number of women by a factor of 3. We could only do that by deconstructing the entire school, re-engineering it back together in a different way, changing the culture of that school, and now we end up with America's largest and most diverse engineering school, which we're really, really excited about. But I want to give you a sense of the scale of the challenge. 64,300 more graduates with bachelor's degrees per year. Now that's just to get to the national average of bachelor's degrees. That's not to turn everybody into a college graduate. That's just to get the economy to about a third of the population with bachelor's degrees. 64,000 per year. Next year, the year after, the year after, the year after, the year after. So to our panel, this is what we're going to talk about is how do we do this? So here's the gap. Needed to close the gap. 11.9 million additional degree holders. No one is thinking at this scale. The economy has not been performing well in the United States for decades on a consistent and ongoing basis. And the reason is that we have not invested the energy and the resources and the designs into the production of human talent at its full potential. We have kept ourselves down, and now we're paying an unbelievable price. Yes, absolutely. Unbelievable national deficit, unbelievable out of control inability to even pay our own bills, to generate the revenue that we need to pay for the things that we want, because we're letting our talent lie fallow. We have not embraced this problem. I do find it interesting from time to time when people say to me, why are you so animated about this? I want our country to be successful. I want our country to be successful for everyone that lives here. It will not be successful if we have wide gaps in educational attainment. Look at the gap. 11.9 million people. That's just to get to the national average. If we get to the national average, the dramatic economic outcomes will alter the economic trajectory and the competitiveness of the United States. Now, the rest of the world figured this out. So these are changes in the college degree attainment rate for working age populations around the world. Now, South Korea, at the end of the war, South Korea looked like North Korea economically. South Korea now is richer than Italy. They've altered across all of the complexities of their society educational attainment. Ireland, a formerly poor country, no longer poor. The United States has done well, but unevenly, and should be at the top of the pack. We used to be, as you can see, at the top of the pack for decades and decades and decades and decades, for over 140 years. And now we're not, and our slope is tipping over. Isn't it somewhat ironic that just as our population is expanding in its diversity, just as our population is, in a sense, moving in the direction of the American dream, we start dropping off. Oh, it's too expensive. We can't do this. We can't do that. We can't make this happen. We can't make that happen. This is a dramatic slide about the future. If the United States doesn't work this out, if we don't take that gold line back to the top, then we will not have the highest performing economy. We will have decreased rates of social mobility, and we'll continue to have the same thing that we're experiencing now. In the bottom quarter of family incomes, the family income that I grew up in the bottom quarter of family incomes, I was the first kid in my family ever to go to college. Not my family, in my history of my family. If we don't change it, we will have peaked economically around 1980, and we will enter into a period of social instability of significant scale and length, because we will no longer be competitive in the global economy, and we'll be no longer competitive in the global economy because we didn't figure out how to make educational attainment equal across the population, across all of the talent and all the energy that we have. So look at the change. So I want to go back. I won't go back, but look at South Korea's change. Look at Ireland's change in per capita GDP compared to all other major industrialized countries. It turns out that this notion of focusing on educational attainment really works. We're not focusing on it. We got a lot of gibberish going on. We're not focusing on it. Our per capita GDP should be continuing to rise, and it would rise dramatically, off the charts, if we could solve this issue of the gap in educational attainment for Latino families here in the United States. Now, we have uneven attainment across the country. This is all 50 states. The size of the circle is the size of the state. It turns out there's only one thing I want you to see in this chart. It turns out that the more people you graduate from college, the more money you have per capita in your state, period. Period. Now, it's not an easy thing. I'm not trying to oversimplify it. I'm just saying there is a correlation, and people that tell you that there's no correlation, or people that tell you that, college, we don't really need college, we don't need this, we don't need that, what those are people are saying is that we don't want to pay for any of this. We don't want to pay for any of this. Whatever the world used to be, that's what we'd like it to continue to be. I'm like, well, too bad for you, because that world's gone. Doesn't even exist anymore. If we can't drive things up, it's not going to work. So, what are the social benefits from expanding attainment? Increased earnings, yes, it's not only about money. Reduced unemployment, yes, absolutely. Improved health status from people that are educated. Increased voting and civic participation. Decreased support and use of social services. So there's investments, pay now, pay later. Take a look at this. In terms of US-born Hispanics, men and women. Now, we don't have the balance that we need between men and women yet, but we're making progress in that. But look at the change. If you were a high school dropout and became a college, if you were from a family of high school dropouts and became a college graduate, look at the change in the difference. It's unbelievable. Now, states have set up these goals. These are the educational attainment goals in more than 30 states, including Arizona, where they've said they want 60, 65, 66, 70% of their population after high school to get a post-secondary certificate. No one's even close to any of these numbers. All these states, all these governors, all these chambers of commerce have laid this all out so that they can get there. There is no method. I'm coming back to the panel now. There is no way. We need new ideas, new ways of moving forward, new kinds of institutions, new kinds of structures, new kinds of alliances. The mayor and I were talking about, well, maybe Phoenix and Miami could get together and decide how to make sure that we built fantastic engineering outcomes at scale across an entire population. One thing we've done at ASU is we built this thing called the University Innovation Alliance with these 11 universities involved. And here's what we've decided among these 11 universities: Ohio State, Michigan State, Central Florida, ASU, Oregon State, UC Riverside. We decided to do 4 things. This is an example, back to the panel, an example of doing something new. We decided, can we produce more graduates? Can we lower the cost to produce a graduate? Can we produce more graduates from lower income families in particular? And can we innovate together? In the first 3 years, we've increased the number of students from Pell-eligible families graduating from these schools by 30% above the base in 3 years, just by innovating together. So an idea here, a new innovation here, is to actually innovate together, learn together, advance together. As stupid as that sounds, it turns out that's an innovation by itself. Now here's the kicker. 68% of all jobs in Arizona by 2020 will require you to have graduated from high school and have something after high school: a vocational certificate, a technical certificate, military courses, an associate's degree, or a bachelor's degree. 68%. I put this slide up. Nobody believes it. That is a fatal error. We can already show you the trend lines that point this out. So it's actually, if we don't fix educational attainment, things are not only going to just stay the same, they're actually going to get worse. ASU, by the way, this is what we used to be. Green, in this case, is white. Blue is Hispanic. You can see that we used to be basically a white institution. No longer. We both grew the institution, diversified the institution, and drove the institution to higher levels of success at all levels. You can see it now in the reverse modality. This is first-time, full-time freshman enrollment, now 50% white, 50% non-white. The institution in the past was, as you can see, anything but. This doesn't happen just by accident. This is not the wind changing direction. This is the redesign of the institution. While the institution has improved in quality, improved in impact, and become a world-class research university at the same time. What it means is innovation on all fronts. What it means is changing numbers at scale. What it means is thinking about this. Einstein, whether or not he said it or not, his name means more to you than mine. And so you'll say, I heard from this guy, this chunky guy on the stage today, and he said that Einstein said, you cannot solve a problem from the same consciousness that created it. You must learn to see the world anew. We cannot solve the problem of educational attainment and Latino educational attainment by just saying, well, what we really need to do is to tweak this or to tweak that or to make this happen or make that happen. You cannot solve it from that level of consciousness. You need a new level of consciousness. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to invite up Carlos Gimenez, the mayor of Miami-Dade County, Florida, Gabriella Gomez, Deputy Director for Postsecondary Policy and Advocacy at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, a strong supporter of ASU and a strong funder of ASU, and John King, President and CEO of the Education Trust and former Secretary of Education under President Obama. So if our panelists would come up, we're going to have a discussion. Mr. Mayor, thank you. Gabriella, thank you. Mr. Secretary, thank you. So I thought where we would start is, what do you got? What ideas do you have? Mayor, we were talking a little bit. What comes to mind? What do you think about?
Look, my job as mayor is to position my community to prosper, to have the jobs that my residents can attain. And so,
For everybody's benefit, how many people live in the combined Miami-Dade?
close to 3 million people.
3 million people, and it's one of these unified governments between county, city, the whole.
I run the county, and there are municipalities inside the
Yeah.
county, but the county is the overarching entity in terms of we run the two largest economic generators, which are airport or seaport, largest police and fire departments. We run water and sewer, transportation. So we have a $7 billion budget of 26,000 employees. But that's great, and I'm the CEO, I'm the strong mayor of the system. But for me, the vision is, all right, how do I diversify my economy? Because we're based on tourism and real estate, and that wasn't going to get us into it wasn't really going to carry us through to the 21st century. So we created something called One Community, One Goal, where we targeted industries.
One Community, One Goal?
One Community, One Goal, which I am the chair of, run by the Beacon Council, which is our economic development arm of Miami-Dade County. And then businesses, educational institutions, a coalition of people came together and says, how do we make this vision of these targeted industries, how do we increase the job opportunities? And obviously, in order to increase job opportunities, educational facilities were a big part of that, and they're a big part of our plan. And so, listening to you, it's quite evident that we have to. Although I think our institutional, our institutions of higher learning, they're actually pretty well represented. Miami-Dade County is 60% Latino, Hispanic. Most of the people that live there weren't born there. I wasn't born there. I was born in Cuba. And so we have the largest community college in the nation. So you go from high school, community college, and you go.
Go Eduardo.
What's that? Eduardo Padron, a great college president. And then we have a very large public university, FIU. Which I think is following a lot of what you're doing here at ASU. And let me tell you, I'm very impressed with what you're doing. But my job as mayor is not to get into the weeds of how you do what you do. Yeah. This is what I want. Yeah. Okay, I want us to have, we know what are the technologies or what are the jobs of the 21st century. It's high tech, it's design.
So you need more engineers, more designers.
Exactly, and so we want more engineers. How do we produce more engineers? Because we've had a brain drain in Miami-Dade. The richest man in the world, Jeff Bezos, comes from Miami-Dade. He's not in Miami-Dade right now. We want to get him back, all right? But he comes from Miami-Dade. So we actually have a very good educational system, but we didn't have the jobs to keep our brightest. And so for me, it's kind of selfish. It's selfish because I have children and I have grandchildren. I want my children and grandchildren to have greater opportunity in my community than what I had, so that they can stay and live, work, play in the greatest community I think that we have. Well, obviously, I'm biased.
So you're saying that this notion of one county or one community, one goal, that the community includes the universities, includes the schools, includes everyone thinking about things together, which is uncommon. So a design outcome of this would be we're all in this together.
Correct.
We think about it together. The universities should spend less time worrying about where they are in some obscure, semi-worthless national ranking and spend more time thinking about how successful is Miami-Dade.
Yeah, but also we have a community, we have a educational council which includes the local school board and the superintendent, all the universities inside.
Everybody sits together.
They all get together. These are the things we want to do. How do we attain, how do we train, how do we educate our young people to actually be able to attain work in these different areas? And then my job as mayor is to how do I incentivize those particular areas that we're trying to accelerate. And so we've gone from basically no tech when I became mayor to right now, Miami-Dade leads the nation in startups from zero. So we're becoming a tech center. Now the thing is, all right, we're becoming a tech center. I need these graduates to come
to grow
and accelerate it, because one of the things is, okay, we don't train enough, and so that's everything has to work together in the community. It's holistic. It just can't be that the educational institution can't go off by itself saying we're going to train for this when in fact that's not what we're really looking at. And we can't say we want to do that unless the educational community says, yeah, we are now aligned with you in order to make that happen.
Yep. So Gabriella, what's your thinking in this space? I mean, you've looked at this from inside the government, a policy perspective, a broader perspective, and then your Gates work, so.
Well, I'd love to build on what the mayor was saying as well, because your story is really the story that I've, over time in policy now at the Gates Foundation, is there's not one silver bullet. We can't do this alone. And partnerships are a really key thing. And I'd say over time, historically, philanthropy has played more and more of a role in how do we incentivize the right ideas and solutions out there. And I think that's part of what we're trying to do at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, is work with individuals and entities at the University Innovation Alliance. We work with Miami-Dade College, and of course, Dr. King here as well. So we're trying to say, what are the ideas out there that we can help foster? Because partnership is a key part of how we're going to advance this. And sometimes we get a little uncomfortable when we start to ask folks to get out of their comfort zone, because there's sustainability that you need either in a community or a job, but it's really about how can we establish a common goal. I was joking with Dr. King and said, working for Arne Duncan, he talked about tight on goal, loose on means. Can we all get together and say, what is our common goal? Because once you agree on the goal, how we get there, we can.
So what's the best way to determine a common goal? So looks like at Miami-Dade, they're working towards this common goal.
I think that's a great idea, but this is the thing. Like, we as a foundation shouldn't say, hey, Dr. Crow, we're going to establish what that goal is. What works for the Alliance? What works for Miami-Dade? Because all we want is to help advance success and attainment,
right,
and ultimately the workforce.
Right. And so is it appropriate to set educational attainment goals for all segments of the society as well as in total? I mean, is that a good way to set goals, or is it better to set broader goals of economic competitiveness and then drive everybody in that direction?
I feel like that's a way that everybody understands. And when you start to exclude instead of include, you use I'm guilty of this, and we are guilty of this at the foundation, at the department as well. We were guilty of this, using jargon and lingo of attainment rate, success. No, we just want people to go out there, get degrees, and get jobs, right? We just want people to be able to be successful, be good citizens in their community. So that's, however you can define that, I think is really what we would strive for together.
Okay. John, what do you think? You know, you've looked at everything from, many levels, including this, we have a, believe it or not, we have a national government which was never intended to be pervasive and involved in all things, and the Constitution of the United States sets aside education as being a responsibility of the states, and then schools set aside by the states to be a responsibility of local communities. And so we designed ourselves in that way. So you've been looking at things from the sort of national system level. I mean, what do we need to do to get new designs going? How do we make things happen?
Well, let me suggest we have a belief problem we need to solve, an investment problem we need to solve, and an incentive problem we need to solve. The belief problem is where you started, right? Which is we have to convince everybody that this solving the attainment gap problem, particularly for Latino students, for African-American students, for low-income students, is the way we save our economy and our democracy.
Right.
And then we have to
So just on the side.
Yeah.
So why do you think that's not easy to understand for people that, seem to have a brain between their two ears, but I'm not always sure. So
part of what happens is, and you hear this in K-12 and you hear it in higher ed. People say our completion rate is low, our graduation rate is low, but look at who our students are. I mean, our students are Latino, our students are African American, our students are working, our students are
low
adults.
expectations.
Low expectations and the belief that institutional behavior won't make a difference. Mm-hmm. And what you've shown at ASU, along with other peers around the country, is that institutional behavior does make a difference. Right? I think about Georgia State, which is one of your partners in the University Innovation Alliance. They've shown that the quality of advising that students get can make a difference in whether or not they complete. Right? They have a system called intrusive advising. I tend to call it nagging. But essentially, if you get a bad grade on the semester midterm, the advisor calls and says, what's going on? What's your plan? right? If you register for a class, it's not going to help you get to complete your major and graduate on time. Your advisor calls and says, hey, let's talk about your selection of classes. So institutional behavior matters. City University of New York has a program called ASAP. It's for community college students who are required to take a remedial course. In ASAP, you get intensive advising, you get emergency grants if you run into financial challenges, and you get a Metro card, subway pass, right? And you only get the subway pass if you show up for advising. Turns out, taking transportation out of the way as an obstacle for students makes a big difference. Taking financial issues out of the way makes a big difference. The advising makes a difference. CUNY ASAP has doubled the completion rate in community college. So it is doable. That's one. Two, the investment problem is states over the last 30 years have systematically disinvested from public education. We were talking about that in the case of Arizona. Public higher ed is our best engine of social mobility as a country, but yet state after state has reduced their investment in public higher ed, and they're putting the money into prisons, frankly.
And maybe the mayor can come on and say, who would do that? Because our competitors, Korea, China, other economies around the world, they're accelerating their investments in educational attainment. We've leveled ours out. Now, that doesn't mean that that model, by the way, is the only model that can work. That is, government model is the only model that can work. There are other models. But why do you think that we're not, while we're changing the investment pattern, trying to find other solutions? What do you think is the root of it?
Yeah. Part of it is that the population has changed. And we have to have an honest conversation about that, right? The college students of today look different from the college students of 50 years ago. And some of the folks who went to college 50 years ago do not want to pay for the college students of today. And that is something we have to overcome. We have to overcome that as a political matter. We have to overcome that in terms of the will of the business community to say if we want a well-prepared workforce, we have to be willing to pay the taxes and invest in it. The last point I would make is the incentive problem is real. The way we structure our entire higher education sector today is that you get more money by enrolling more students, not by enrolling more low-income students, not by enrolling more first-generation students, just by enrolling more students.
Or perhaps even by only graduating students do you get resources or get...
Exactly.
Right.
The incentives aren't aligned around completion. We ought to change the system, and we ought to do this at the federal level when the Higher Education Act is reauthorized, but states can do this too. We ought to change the incentives so the way that you get more resources is to enroll students who are vulnerable, who need the support, and then get them not just to freshman year, but get them to graduation with a meaningful degree.
And I would add on that there's no incentives for their partnership to happen between the feds and the state to solve that problem. Again, getting to the common goal, can we incentivize a common approach, or at least allowing for ideas to flourish between the feds and the state and local entities to get together to solve those types of problems?
Right, so I've got 4 design parameters that have come out of the things that you guys have been talking about. So I really like the one community, one goal. I really like the notion of partnerships as being the method to move forward, meaning if we just live by the former model of just the government's supposed to fund the schools and then everything will just happen, well, that probably is an antiquated model. The notion of setting higher expectations and then holding everybody accountable to these higher expectations. And then this notion of changing incentive structures. Because our incentive, I mean, you're going to get behaviors that are a function of incentive structures. And so why don't we take each of those one at a time? So one community, one goal. What are, and Mayor, you've been thinking about this for a while, so I'm going to start with John and work back. Okay. So one community, one goal. What should be the goals at a community level where the private sector, the government sector, the universities, the K-12 community, everybody is focused in their region, in their area around, you know, this one goal. What should those goals be?
Give you one quick example. In New York, a school called P-TECH, which is now being replicated around the country. This is a partnership between the New York City Department of Education, City University of New York, and IBM. When students graduate from the P-TECH high school, they graduate with a high school diploma, an associate's degree, first in line for a job at IBM. In the design of the school, IBM engineers were sitting next to the 9th grade math teacher talking about what are the critical skills that students need to have in order to be successful at IBM.
So what I hear there then in one community, one goal is that literally everybody's actually involved in the educational process, including the companies, the schools, everybody. everybody's involved in moving towards
right.
the goal. So, Gabriella.
Well, and I would say, adding to, building on what Dr. King was saying, is in that scenario, the goal has been, a common goal has been established. And because there was a common goal of IBM's going to get, we're all working towards this goal of better jobs and placement, everyone has skin in the game. And that's what I think is a really important part of I think, also what the mayor was talking about. So the support that you get from a governmental entity, in this example, New York City Public Schools, them putting in the money. And I know that Dr. King in New York, you did a lot also statewide. So those kinds of incentives in champions, that's the other thing that I would throw into the mix here, is ensuring that entities like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation can help support entities, because it's champions in these entities, because it's not an easy thing to also put yourself out there. So to the extent that we can be having support and visibility if needed for that, I think is helpful.
Okay. Mayor, one community, one goal. I mean, you're already doing it, but what else would you add to it, if you could?
It's actually working extraordinarily well. We had targets of creating 75,000 additional jobs. We actually created close to 150,000. We had targets of creating 25,000 jobs in these targeted areas. We actually created over 60,000.
The high wage jobs, or
exactly. And so it's actually working, pretty well. And so, I'm thinking about, okay, how do we achieve all this? And it harkens. We're in the running for Amazon in Miami-Dade, and so we kind of learned about the Amazon culture, and what they do is that they actually write a press release, which is really the outcome, right? And so I guess one community, one goal, I would say this is the outcome. That's what we want. And then you work back into the details of how it is that you get to that. And then how everybody is involved together with that single goal in mind. How do we increase the design sector in Miami-Dade? How do we increase the tech sector in Miami-Dade? How do we increase aviation and the other 4 different entities or disciplines? And then it drills down into business and education, and the entire community is focused in on that, and that allowed us to harness that energy in a single path versus all that energy going out 70 different places. And the business community and the community bought into that's the vision, that's what we want. And that's how we got the results. What would I change of it right now? I don't know if I want to mess with it. It's actually working pretty well. I'm sure you can. Yeah. I'm sure somebody will come from the outside, hey, why don't you tweak this and tweak that? And and I'm not a...
Well, you do wish you could have more engineers, so...
Oh, no, for doubt, but that is also, we are number 1 in startups. Yeah. We may be lagging behind in scalability. And so now, all right, so how do we now get scalability? Yeah. And how do we bring investors and venture capital and all that? And look, as mayor, what's really interesting about my job is that I deal with like 500 different things in every day. And so I got to think, okay, how do I bring folks down? How do I bring the creative class down? Right? Because the creative class is really, really important. So, all right, so we made huge investments in culture. And, we have these great performing arts centers, and we have museums, et cetera. That never was part of the scene, in Miami. And so now we're bringing the creative class in. We're bringing people that would think of Miami maybe as a second home, being now their first home, because now they have the kind of things that would make life interesting, in Miami. And so, as mayor, again, I don't get into your job, right? You're the folks in the academic institutions, and I said, look, that's what I want. I want you to go over there, and so it's up to you to like take me over there.
So on this second design thing that we pulled out, partnerships. So let's focus on transforming the Latino workforce. So what partnerships should we have? I think we still have this thing. I think often people still think that all the solutions rest with the government. I know that this organization is elected and appointed officials from around the country, and it turns out that it's not likely that the partnerships will be built around the government. It's likely that the government will be a participant as a partner in many of these things. And so just thinking about transforming the Latino workforce on the scale that we're talking about and the kinds of partnerships that we need, just in quick form, what are some of the ideas for new kinds of partnerships from anybody? Like either describe one that you wish you had or that you wish somebody could pull off or what have you. Because if people think that somehow all these things are going to be solved because all of a sudden people are going to go to the voting booth and they're going to press a lever and says, increase my taxes by 50% and devote it all to sending more kids to college, that's not going to happen. And so that's not going to be the path to success. So partnerships, new kinds of partnerships. What do you wish we had?
That's a tough one, man.
Yeah.
Well, no, Mayor, you and I talked about one.
Huh?
So why is it that
New types?
Cities and places have to solve things on their own? Why can't we be building alliances? Why can't there be leagues in academia that aren't related to sports? So why can't FIU and ASU build an engineering league that then changes the entire spectrum of people having access?
One of the things I took out of this conference is that the alliance that you have, right?
Yeah.
With Central Florida. That's great. I love Central Florida, but I like FIU better.
Yeah, I understand.
All right? So, you know, how can I get FIU to be part of?
But there can be 50 different kinds of partnerships or alliances. So
yeah.
So what ideas? We're after now trying to get everybody. These guys are falling asleep out here. So.
No.
Look, I'll give you one simple thing. Every year, students leave billions of dollars on the table because they didn't finish the free application for federal student aid, right? The FAFSA. In a community, the task for everybody, nonprofits, faith leaders, local government, the school district, the school counselors, the teachers union, the goal for everybody should be that 100% of graduating seniors have completed the FAFSA. That's going to actually bring money to those students for college.
Okay.
I agree.
That's one partnership. What else?
I love what you said. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is supporting that sort of effort, but also ensuring that we simplify the form and the process because we have seen that. One item that I just want to add as a wrinkle or additional part of the conversation here for partnerships is what types of partnerships and what issues I think could be evolved over time. So you could see something like a partnership that looks at the scale issue, because scale is a challenge for everybody now, because you can get some really good ideas, but are they replicable, and under what circumstances is the right combination leading to success? So I think when you get your peer and cohort together, like just sitting at the table, a bunch of you could say, hey, I have this great app or something, and have you looked at this? And you all start to say, no, but if we had this other app and we made it better, you're a peer cohort that's learning from each other. And that's a little bit of the approach that we've taken with the University Innovation Alliance, right? Where get a lot of entities who are in common space to learn from one another. And I think that's how we start to figure out the scale issue, because everyone wants to talk about scale and how do we go to scale, but it's not easy, as Dr. Crow will tell you. But if we get the right thinking and the right motivation in place, that's where we can go. And we're part of that solution, but we're not the only solution, because not one entity can solve, not one person alone can solve that particular problem.
So, Mayor, anything else on partnerships? You just mentioned it would be great to have some other kinds of alliances between schools and so forth.
But we have alliances all the time, and so you know, as government, what we can do is provide seed money, provide incentives. But one thing that I've always said as mayor is that we're not the job creators. We have to create the conditions for job creation and let that flow. We've partnered with community groups that go knock on doors and say, hey, we have jobs for you. Simple as that, all right? And not only will we go to these, this is called Employ Miami-Dade. And we know that there are certain zip codes that have high unemployment or high underemployment rates. And so we have community groups that are part of that group that go and knock on doors, and then we send them to we train them in three disciplines: construction, because there's a heck of a lot of construction going on in Miami-Dade right now, hospitality, and culinary arts. And we've had tremendous success in putting people to work that have never worked before. And so those are partnerships that I'm always, my thing is I'm always looking at, okay, how do I create jobs? How do we, not I, how do we then make sure that every resident of Miami-Dade County can take advantage of it? And, you know, you have to watch out that not everybody's going to be a college graduate. So you have to create jobs for those too. You know?
Yeah, the numbers I was showing was up to a third of the population. That's the
right. And so you got to watch out for them too. You know, and,
yes.
and a lot of them right now are not employed, and they haven't been employed. And so, you know, the job that I have and that we have as government, how do we create the conditions to create those jobs, and then those people that are underemployed,
yep.
how do we make sure that we train them to be employed? Right. That doesn't take a college degree, because that would take 4 years.
Sure.
And put them.
Now, I'll come to that, back to that in a second. Let me put something on the table. So we live in a society where the number of jobs requiring what we think of as a high school diploma are collapsing. There's still large numbers of people, 20 to 25%, still not finishing high school on an annual basis. We live in a country that won't allow you to vote until you're 18. You can't buy cigarettes in California until you're 21, but you can drop out of high school at 16 without your parents' permission. So why is it that we allow people to drop out of a system of education that then will ensure the fact that the chances that they'll be able to successfully generate the resources necessary to advance a family, or to not have to become dependent upon others through welfare payments or something like this? Why do we let, this is a design question, why do we allow people to drop out of high school? So I'm going to start with the secretary.
Yeah. Well,
why do you do that?
Oh, right. Ultimately, we shouldn't and we can't. We can't afford to.
But why do we? I'm after why we do.
I think it's an artifact of history, of an economy that we once had where you could get a good job without a high school diploma. But the reality is, even with a high school diploma, as you've pointed out, that's not enough. One of the challenges, I was a high school social studies teacher. One of the challenges with high school is, and I know we have a lot of school board members in the room, one of the challenges with high school kids is they sit in class and they wonder, why am I here? What is this all for?
It might be the right thing to wonder, but what have we done to deal with those kids?
Exactly. We have to rethink how high school happens in a way that students are taking classes, having experiences that are engaging and interesting and compelling. We got to do a lot more on internships, community service opportunities. We've got to make high school a place where you want to be and where you're engaged. Too often, kids don't see the connection between high school and what they're going to do next.
But we still have rigid, fixed high school models that were designed in 1900.
That's right.
And you sit on a wooden desk or some kind of metal desk, and you look at somebody talking up in front of you that you barely understand what it is that they're talking about. And so unless you're dedicated to finishing high school, there's all kinds of emotional rationality to not want to be there.
I think that's right, and that's on us as the adults to change that experience.
Yes. So
I would just add on that there are lots of artifacts left over the school year. The fact that the school year is August, September to
Farmer Town. It's all farmer.
Right?
It's all farmer schedule.
Agrarian time period when we actually have advanced into a very different time period and not adapted. In some places it has been adapted, but there's still lots of remnants of that. The transition space is a really important space because it is, as the transition from middle school to high school, we know where those drop-off points are. And then when we've got them in high school, how do we make sure that we're transitioning appropriately into college or post-secondary education? And this is where we really need some good thinking. We have some good models where we've got early college, high school, we've got dual enrollment programs, but what else? What else do we need to be doing to capture it? So if we can think about focusing on that transition space, I think is really important. One thing I did want to get back to, which I wanted to find a common theme here is so important, is data or information, because as the mayor was talking about folks knocking on doors, they were able to use good information to target to help somebody. So I'm with you, I go to Target. How many of you have had your data breached, right? I'm sick of it. But if it's something that's actually, if I understand how the information is going to be used and it's actually going to help me get a job, I think that's a really good thing. The fact that, as Dr. King was talking about the FAFSA and the information and being able to target that, ASAP, the nagging from the advising, that's based on good information to then target and help somebody. So I think the more that we can think of data and information as a good thing, used properly, I think that could be a game changer. And the use of your data today, I'd like to just applaud, because it really does get us to think and use it and apply it in a way to move towards an improvement.
Yep. So, Mayor, what about high school dropouts? Because you can't. What do you think about it?
I have a finished idea why you allow kids to drop out of high school at 16. What's 16? What's magical about the age of 16? I have a finished idea why.
Well, at 16, you know everything.
Well, I understand that. So look, I've been wondering about that since I was in high school. I mean, I can leave at 16, great. But I obviously didn't. But you can show with data that if you drop out, beforehand, that you're going to be at a significant disadvantage. So even now, with a high school degree, you're still at a significant disadvantage.
Yeah.
So why do we want to keep them at an even greater disadvantage? Right. I really have no idea why we allow kids to drop out of high school. It's beyond me. And by the way, they're not even adults.
Yes.
They can't vote.
Right.
Right, but they can make a decision to drop out of high school. That to me doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Yeah, so some of you that are in these elected and appointed positions, I mean, some energy that needs to be applied to something, just to sort of put this on the table, is that's basically insanity. But it's derivative of, that is dropping out of high school, but it's derivative of the fact that we haven't seen enough innovation in the high schools and so forth and so on. But nonetheless, we need to be able to work on all these things. So the mayor's got a drop-dead time frame coming up here. So I want to turn to this 11 million person gap between average educational college attainment in the United States and Latino educational attainment at the level of a bachelor's degree. 11 million people. So 11 million people, that's a tiny percentage of the population of the country, but one of the most important populations of the country, this rapidly growing, high energy, driven. It turns out that Latinos have the highest aspirational dreams for being an American of any ethnic group in the United States. It's an interesting thing. They have the highest level of aspirations of what they'd like to see happen.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So 11 million more college graduates in the next 30 years in the base population. What's the biggest idea that you've got?
Can I have two?
Yes.
So
what are they?
One is really about this investment notion. We have students who aren't able to finish because they can't afford to finish. And it's not just tuition. And I know you grapple with this. For some students, it's food, it's housing, it's childcare for their kids, it's access to health care. So one thing we have to do is we have to say, because we want more graduates, it's worth making that investment. The second is we need to invest in innovation. We need to invest in innovation in the places where the students are. Half of Latino students are starting in community colleges. Nearly half of Latino students are in Hispanic-serving institutions, even though Hispanic-serving institutions are about 4% of the colleges and universities in the country. So we have to invest in those institutions. I would create a federal innovation fund, focus on those institutions where the money goes to invest in whether it's better advising or new course design, rethinking remediation, big ideas to try to rapidly increase completion.
Okay, Gabby.
And I think what we would love to be participating in those kinds of ideas. And in the past, with Race at the Top and that kind of approach, the foundation was part of those helping support at the level. What I think also in this is elevating what good looks like, because I think that's part of what's been great about these kinds of partnerships, the University Innovation Alliance, and what I know Dr. King does at Education Trust, is because a lot of folks are like, I don't know, what can I do? I don't have any ideas. No, we have some places you can go. Maybe it's not exactly the way to do it, but tailor it to how you do it. Get thinking around the table. The curse and the blessing of some of the successes of the GSUs and the ASUs is you get a lot of calls, I'm sure, Dr. Crow, of how can we do this in my place? So how do we help get more of you and those like Dr. King's in the world so that the gospel, so to speak, can start to be prolific?
So I'm hearing innovation fund,
That we would
partner innovation,
Yep.
syndicate innovation. So it's interesting that, you know, education in the United States is a massive, massive, massive economic thing in and of itself. Yet it has very little research.
That's right.
Very little innovation funding. Very little connectivity. I mean, if only it was as important as some of the other things that receive such research funding. So we've got a cultural thing here going on also. So, Mayor?
Lower the cost.
Lower the cost.
Lower the cost. I mean, why would it be surprising if the average Latino family makes, on average, less than the average white family? Why would it be surprising you that you have fewer Latinos finishing college? That's it's expensive to go to school. Solution, I think, is technology. You're looking into it, like artificial intelligence, et cetera, so that a large portion of the teaching doesn't have to be so labor intensive. And then with that, you can start to lower the cost and make education more accessible. You should have more grants given to lower income people in the United States, you know, whatever the income is, white, black, Latino, whoever, all right?
Yeah.
So that more and more people have access to higher education. Because as you said, you know, the future lies in education. And so as we can lower the cost and then have more access to people that come from a lower, you know, economic strata, then that's when I believe that you'll make some strides. And also that we expect you to graduate. Don't put an expectation that, no, well, you know, you're not supposed to graduate. You know,
Yeah.
We expect you to graduate. We expect you to do as well as anybody else.
Right.
And they can, by the way. We can do as well as anybody else.
Right.
And so those are the things that I would do. But I'm a great believer that technology can solve, you know, many of the issues that we have today.
So just on the side, so, you know, we're producing, you know, 3 times the number of graduates, doing 5 times the level of research. We have 12 times the number of learners. We've improved our 4-year graduation rate by 95%. We've taken 20,000 additional first-generation college students. We've lowered the cost to the state to produce a degree by 75%. We have greatly increased the number of students coming from lower-income families and graduating from lower-income families. And change in culture and the use of technology are the means by which we've been able to achieve those 2 things. Now, it turns out that in the educational sector at the university level, the use of technology is an evil act. It's the movement away from the way that the model is supposed to work. John sitting with his genius students so that he can educate them in being John. And so that's part of the way.
You know, if we don't do that, if we don't embrace technology, there are countries that will.
Yeah.
And so we're just going to fall behind.
Yeah.
All right. And
so what do we have in our last couple minutes? So here we have leadership from all around the country, elected and appointed officials, running counties, running cities, running school districts, running state legislatures, making things happen all over the country. What do we need? What do we need them to do to help us reach these goals for Latino educational attainment? Just really short form, like what comes to mind?
Yeah. One tool and one suggestion. The one tool is at EdTrust, we have this report where we compare institutions that are similar size, similar entering SAT scores, but show that 2 institutions almost exactly identical can have 30, 40-point differences in their graduation rate for Latino students. So take a look at that report and look at the institutions in your community and ask, are they doing everything they could to help students graduate? The one request...
So look at data, look at analytics, hold people accountable.
That's right. On the accountability piece, this is a higher ed problem, but it's not just a higher ed problem. It is also a K-12 and early learning problem. If we don't create opportunity for students from the earliest ages, we've only got about 40% of our 4-year-olds in public preschool programs. So this problem often begins with kids who aren't ready when they get to kindergarten. So we need to ask, what could we be doing in early learning and K-12 to make sure
so
that
everybody needs to
they're
understand that the
prepared.
child's vocabulary at 48 months old will predict graduation rates in high school greater than any other single factor. And so that's an important point. Gabby?
Demand better.
Demand better.
Because that is the essential element. Unless you as a parent and as a community member are demanding better, none of this is going to change. So demand better, demand more, and be active in your community and participate, because Mayor Jimenez cannot do this alone. We don't want to do this alone, can't do it alone. Demand better, make it an issue, and be active and vocal as a parent, as a community member, because otherwise this will remain a silent issue.
Okay, so thank you, Gabby. Mayor, you get the final word before we exit the stage.
Well, I want two final words.
Okay.
First on this one, how many of you are school board members? Okay.
A good chunk. Yeah.
I'm not talking to you, okay? Everybody that's not a school board member, that's an elected official, education is your job too.
Yeah. Yes.
It is vital to your community.
I agree.
So being that I'm married to an educator, it's drilled into me all the time.
Yes.
And without education, so as elected official, whether you're on the school board or not, especially if you're not, you need to take an active role in the education of the children in your community. Whether you are a council member, a commissioner, et cetera, education is the key to our future here in Miami-Dade County. The second thing, not Miami-Dade, I'm sorry, the country, I'm sorry. I always talk about Miami-Dade, but the country. Second thing is, I know that you're holding your next year's conference will be in Miami-Dade, so I want to welcome you and tell you that you're going to have a great time in Miami-Dade. We're here. I love this. The city is great. It's got mountains. It's got deserts. We have sand too, but it's a little bit different.
Our sand has more rattlesnakes in it.
And if you haven't been to Miami in the last 3 or 4 years, you will not, recognize it. Yesterday, I was at the ribbon cutting of actually two new, high rises. The tallest high-rise residential tower in the United States south of Manhattan, and then a new 50-story hotel. And so you're going to have a great time. We welcome you with open arms. We're a very diverse community. Spanish, no problem, okay, anywhere you go. So if you speak English, we'll look at you a little weird. But anyway, welcome, and I look forward to seeing you in Miami in 2019. Thank you.
All right.
God bless you all.
Yes. Well, let's thank the panel, and hopefully this has been useful to all of you. So thank you.
Good to see you.